Imagine walking into a room, hoping for a fresh start, only to face one of the most shocking moments of your life. That's exactly what happened to Marcus, a highly successful CEO who just happened to be in a wheelchair. When he showed up for a routine interview at a company he was interested in, he had no idea that a simple conversation with the HR manager would turn into a moment that would leave him speechless. The HR manager, completely unaware of Marcus's true identity, launched into a tirade of shocking, racist comments. It was clear she thought she could belittle him, dismissing his worth based solely on his appearance and the fact that he was in a wheelchair. But what she didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just any job applicant. He was the CEO of a thriving business, someone who had built his empire from the ground up. What happens next is something you won't believe. With the HR manager unaware of Marcus's true status, their conversation takes a dramatic turn. How will Marcus handle the situation? Stick around as we dive deeper into this unbelievable encounter in the next part of the story. As Marcus sat in the lobby, waiting for his scheduled interview, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The company had seemed promising on paper, a place where he could expand his influence and bring new ideas to the table. But now, as he glanced around, he started questioning whether he was in the right place. The receptionist had given him a strange look when he arrived, and the air felt off, almost tense. But Marcus brushed it off. He was used to people's reactions when they saw him in his wheelchair, though he knew it was something that should never define him. The HR manager, Denise, finally called him into her office. She was a middle-aged woman, dressed in a sharp business suit, with an air of confidence that made her seem more intimidating than welcoming. She barely looked at him as he entered, giving him a quick nod before gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Marcus, calm as always, took his seat, smiling politely. "What can you offer us?" Denise asked, her voice dripping with condescension, though Marcus didn't yet pick up on the subtle malice in her tone. "I believe my experience in leadership and innovation speaks for itself," Marcus responded. He briefly explained the success of his company, focusing on the hard work he had put in to overcome challenges and break barriers. But Denise wasn't listening. Instead, she began to size him up, her eyes scanning him in a way that made Marcus feel uncomfortable. It wasn't just the wheelchair, it was the way she assumed things about him, about his abilities, without even giving him a chance to speak his mind. "You know," she began, "I'm not sure how someone in your condition could handle the demands of a high-pressure job like this." Marcus felt the sting of her words, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he looked at her quietly, waiting for her next move. What was she going to say next? Denise's words hung in the air, sharp and dismissive, but Marcus remained calm. He had faced this type of ignorance before, and he had learned long ago how to compartmentalize his feelings. He wasn't about to let her small-minded assumptions derail him. Still, something about the way she spoke was unsettling. It wasn't just her doubt about his abilities, it was the way she seemed to take pleasure in his discomfort, as if she felt superior by simply pointing out what she thought were his flaws. "I've built an entire company from the ground up," Marcus continued, his voice steady, though inside, his frustration was growing. "I've led teams through challenges you can't even begin to imagine. My condition has never defined me. It's my skills, my vision, my leadership that matter." Denise raised an eyebrow, almost as if she was amused by his response. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And you really think you could handle all the responsibilities that come with a role like this? Managing people, making tough decisions, these are high stakes, you know. People like you usually aren't cut out for this type of work." The words hit like a slap to the face, but Marcus didn't flinch. He had heard similar things before, people who saw his wheelchair and assumed he couldn't possibly be capable of leadership. But this time, it stung more than usual. There was something in her voice, a venom that seemed to go beyond simple prejudice. It wasn't just about his disability, it was about her need to remind him of his place. For a moment, Marcus considered walking out. He had no time for this kind of nonsense. But then he remembered why he was there. This company, with its sleek offices and impressive reputation, could be the perfect opportunity to take his business to the next level. If he could make them see past their prejudices, maybe he could change their entire culture. Maybe this would be the wake-up call they needed. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, Denise interrupted him with a scoffing laugh. "I mean, you're really serious about this, aren't you? You actually think you can step into the kind of role that requires real leadership? Don't you have other people doing the heavy lifting for you?" The words were a knife to his pride, but he held his composure. He wanted to let her know that he wasn't just the CEO of a company. He was the heart of it, the driving force. But how could he make her understand that if she wouldn't even see him as a person first? The silence in the room grew thick, and Marcus could almost feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him. The tension was palpable. Denise, seemingly growing more comfortable in her assumptions, began to list off the requirements for the job, barely acknowledging him as she spoke. But Marcus was done listening. He had reached his breaking point. He couldn't let this go on any longer. Just as he was about to reveal his true identity, something he had planned to say for the right moment, there was a knock on the door. It was a soft tap, but it was enough to break the uncomfortable silence. Denise looked up, her expression momentarily faltering. Marcus knew the moment had arrived. Something was about to shift, but what would it be? Denise glanced toward the door, her irritation barely masked. She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Come in," she called, her tone sharp. The door opened, and in walked another employee, a young man in a crisp suit. He looked nervous, glancing from Denise to Marcus, unsure of what to do. "Excuse me, Denise," the man began, his voice trembling slightly. "There's something you need to see. It's urgent." Denise raised an eyebrow, but before she could respond, Marcus saw the young man glance at him, just for a split second, but it was enough. The hesitation, the uncertainty in his eyes, made Marcus' heart race. He could feel the tension building in the room, but he couldn't tell if it was coming from the young man or from Denise. Something was off. Denise sighed, clearly frustrated, but stood up, signaling for the young man to come closer. "This better be good," she muttered under her breath, before turning back to Marcus with a tight smile. "Please just give me a moment." As she stepped toward the young man, Marcus couldn't help but notice that her body language had changed. Her earlier arrogance seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a tense, almost nervous energy. She listened intently as the man whispered something in her ear, and Marcus couldn't make out the words, but he could see the shock on her face as she listened. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and her face drained of color. She took a step back, her hand gripping the back of the chair as if she needed something to hold onto. For a brief moment, the mask of confidence slipped, revealing a flicker of panic in her eyes. Marcus felt a quiet thrill surge through him. Whatever the man had just told her, it had caught her completely off guard. But what was it? What had made her lose that unshakable poise she had been projecting? She turned to Marcus, her face now a strange mix of confusion and hesitation. The air in the room seemed to shift, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. The silence stretched out longer than it should have. Marcus could feel the power of the moment, the pivotal moment where everything could change. "Who are you?" Denise finally managed to ask, her voice shaky, though she tried to cover it with forced composure. Marcus smiled, a calm, steady smile, the kind of smile he had given to boardrooms full of powerful men and women. "You don't know yet?" he asked, his tone casual, but there was a fire beneath it. He could feel the moment teetering on the edge, and he knew the answer to her question would send everything crashing down. Denise's face tightened as realization slowly dawned on her, but it was already too late. The damage had been done, and now all she could do was wait for the truth to unfold. Denise's eyes widened as the weight of Marcus's words sank in. For a moment, the room was eerily still, as if time itself had paused. The young man who had delivered the urgent message stood awkwardly by the door, his eyes flickering between the two of them. Denise opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was caught between disbelief and the dawning horror of what she had just unknowingly done. Marcus, still calm, met her gaze without a hint of emotion. "You've really never heard of me?" he asked again, his voice steady but with a clear edge. He watched as Denise fumbled for a response, her facade cracking further by the second. She stammered, "No, I." Her voice trailed off as she finally seemed to realize the full scope of her mistake. Before she could continue, the door swung open again, and this time it was the CEO's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman who stepped into the room, holding a large folder. She didn't even glance at Marcus. Her focus was entirely on Denise. "I need to speak with you urgently, Denise," she said, her tone clipped. "The investors just called, and they want answers. Now." Denise's face shifted between confusion and panic, and Marcus could feel the tension in the room mounting. It was as if everything was closing in on her at once, the walls of her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. The assistant glanced at Marcus, then back at Denise, noticing the awkward energy between them. "You didn't." The assistant started, then stopped herself, clearly realizing something was off. Denise's face reddened. She was struggling, trying to regain control of the situation, but the ground beneath her feet was shifting too fast. The reality of the situation was sinking in. Marcus had caught her off guard, and now all her carefully constructed judgments and assumptions were unraveling. But as the assistant turned to leave, her eyes flicked back to Marcus one last time. "Wait," she said, her voice now laced with suspicion. "Who are you?" Marcus took a slow, deliberate breath. This was the moment. "I'm Marcus Williams," he said calmly, watching the shock wash over Denise's face. "The CEO of Williams Enterprises." The room seemed to freeze. Denise looked at him, her mouth opening and closing in disbelief. But before she could process his words, the assistant quickly glanced at her phone and frowned. "Denise, the investors, they know. They know he's the one they've been trying to connect with." Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just the man she'd insulted. He was the key to her future, or, more accurately, her downfall. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Denise's face paled, her eyes darting between Marcus and the assistant, as if trying to piece together the disaster she had just unleashed. The assistant gave her one final look. "You're about to find out how bad this can get," she said, her words like a quiet warning. Marcus, however, was already thinking about the bigger picture. He could feel the tide turning, but what he didn't know was how far this moment would go, or what was about to be revealed next. Was Denise just a pawn in something bigger, or was she at the heart of a deeper conspiracy? The stakes were rising, and Marcus could only wait for the storm to fully break. The room was suffocating with tension as Denise stood frozen, her mind racing. She had made the mistake of underestimating Marcus, and now, her entire career hung in the balance. The assistant's words had hit her like a freight train, and all the bravado she had worn so confidently earlier now seemed like a distant memory. She could barely process what was happening, but the reality was clear. She had insulted the very man who could make or break this company. Marcus, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. This was his moment, but he wasn't about to revel in it. He had worked hard to get to where he was, and this confrontation, as satisfying as it was, wouldn't be the end of his story. He didn't need to tear Denise down. The situation was doing it for him. Still, he couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction as he watched her crumble before him. "Denise, you should have done your homework," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying an almost eerie calm. "You've been so quick to judge, but the people you insulted, like me, are the ones you're supposed to be working with." Denise opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her hands shook as she struggled to regain her composure. But the more she tried to fight back, the deeper the hole she dug for herself became. Marcus could see the way she was trying to salvage some dignity, but it was impossible. Just as he was about to stand up and walk out, the assistant spoke up again. "We've just received a call from the investors," she said, her voice even more clipped than before. "They're pulling out. They say they can't trust a company that allows this kind of behavior. Denise's face drained of all color. The assistant's words felt like a death sentence. The investors had been her last hope to salvage her career and this company's reputation, but now that was slipping through her fingers. She looked at Marcus with a mixture of rage and desperation. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she finally managed, though the apology sounded hollow. "I didn't know. I never."